Chapter 12. Mike. An hour later, they finished launching all the teams, except the Bayat and Cop group they had working on clearing rooms and examining other possible locations for the boats used by the KPA insurgency. Mike and Tim headed to the employee area at the back of the warehouse, where they could hear the men talking in rapid-fire back-and-forth conversation. As soon as they entered the expansive break room, the voices died off. Emboldened by Mike's threats to knock someone out, Rostam had taunted the cops on their inability to put a case on the brothers over the years. He hoped one of the cops would respond and bring the Green Berets' wrath down on the two policemen. In turn, Alex had called the brothers a few choice names, albeit with a smile on his face in the event the burly Green Beret popped in during their spat. The quasi-civilized insults were volleyed back and forth as the two groups worked, but the taunts never escalated past words. "Get your gear. We're moving to the closest site you two think they'll be at," Mike ordered, without commenting on the tension he still sensed between the two groups. They took 6 bicycles and rode quietly through the streets, far from the slough. The Green Berets knew there'd be a couple of sentries posted at the boats. Mike guessed they'd find 2 guards, maybe more, but they couldn't be certain until they located and performed a proper recon of the boat's hide site. The Green Berets agreed it was in their best interest to ride out past the furthest spot determined by the brothers and work their way out towards the water. From there, they could start a detailed search of the area, making sure not to move too quickly. It was human nature to pay more attention to the direction with the greatest possibility of a threat, and that direction would be upstream in the direction of the city, not back out the way the KPA men came in. An hour later, the 6 armed men dropped their bicycles into a ditch on the side of the road and set out on foot across the grassy countryside in the direction of the slough. The landscape rose and fell in gentle undulations not more than 20 feet in elevation, so when they reached the crest of the first rounded peak, everyone moved on their bellies. Mike and Tim withdrew binoculars and tasked the other 4 men with rear and flank security. In front of them, the grass shifted lazily in a soft breeze as birds flitted here and there, darting after insects. To their front, Mike could see the shimmering of water he knew had to be the slough. The snaking body of water was less than 400 yards from their position, appearing much narrower at this distance than he'd expected after looking at overhead photos along with his map. 45 minutes of searching yielded no signs of any boat secreted along the slough's banks. Mike shifted his gaze south as a thought came to him. If he were going to leave men with the boats, why not have an insertion point and then send the boats back down the slough to a safe standoff distance while combat operations were conducted? Once the KPA men were finished, they only had to make a call and meet their ride at a predetermined pickup location. Mike rolled onto his side and caught Rostam's eye. If they were going to send boats away while they worked, how far before they hit docks and places people could see them? Never. It's all open land to the bay, Rostam replied. Mike exhaled, thinking how long he'd want to wait if a mission went wonky. The answer was, not long. The boats were somewhere out in front of them. They just needed to work harder to find them. How far are we from town running about 15 or 20 knots? 5 to 10 minutes, maybe? Rostam heaved his shoulders in a shrug. If they're out here, they might be to the south in one of the larger inlets. The tides are going out, so they need a larger inlet or they'll run aground. There's only one, and it's just south of here, maybe half a mile. Let's move. Mike got to his knees and crawled back down the slight incline, allowing the terrain to cover their movement. The cluster of men moved quickly when they could and slowed when the terrain exposed them to a direct line of sight from the waters of the slough. Fortunately for the Green Berets and their crew, irrigation and drainage ditches crisscrossed the landscape, making it perfect for them to stay below the periphery of anyone who might have been on the slough and looking their way. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, the men reached a waterway leading from the road, through the fields, and toward the slough. They were all tired, sweaty, and covered in mud and grime from moving in and out of the ditches and estuaries. Wordlessly, the Green Berets glassed the area in the direction of the slough, while the other 4 men pulled security, no longer needing to be told. Mike focused his gaze down the waterway to where it met the slough. A glint from the sun, shining low from his left, caught his attention, and he refocused his entire effort on the spot. Yes, there it was. The black, glossy surface of a rubber boat, its skin like the inky hide of an orca. Got him, Timmy. Straight down this canal and to the left near the end. Looks like there's a turn or something in this canal before it lets out into the slough. Tim trained his eyes for a full 30 seconds before slowly withdrawing them from his optics. Nice and easy, boys. They're down there, he whispered over his shoulder. There'd been no need for Tim's warning, since every civilian in the party could sense the tension that radiated off of the two Green Berets like heat waves off a hot desert floor. Mike pulled a small spotting scope out of his gear and set it atop a low-profile tripod. Centering the optic on the end of the waterway, he used his finger to turn the focusing dial slowly until the rear of the inflatable boat came clearly into view. He studied the picture in his optic and realized he was looking at two boats parked side by side, pulled mostly off the waterway. The boats were anchored in a small inlet not far from the mouth of the slough, hiding them from anyone moving along the waterway until they were directly adjacent to the channel the boats were moored in. After committing what he saw to memory, Mike passed the scope to Tim, who looked and passed it on. Once every member of their party finished peering into the little high-powered optic, Mike shifted, placing the scope back inside his pack. We're going to swim in, get to within a couple 100 yards, and stalk the rest of the way in. Mike's voice was a hushed whisper. Cops and brothers, get out of the water before the fighting starts and make damn sure you're on our flanks so we don't have any friendly fire incidents. Once we're close enough, I'll give you a signal when it's time for you four to climb out, lay flat, and slither forward. Once the shooting starts, stay down. Don't jump up and make it easy on these guys. Manny hung his head for a moment before looking up, which told Mike and Tim he wasn't fully on board with ghosting a bunch of foreign nationals right within the city limits. Mike shot him a look of exasperation, and when that didn't change Manny's posture, he scuttled over to him. Bro, you don't have to go, but you do have to stay quiet and watch our six if you stay here. I can't have you disrupting this op. No shame in ducking out on us, Mike added glibly. Manny paused for a moment, then seemed to steel himself. He blew out a long exhale and turned to face Mike. I'm good, man. I just thought all this was a thing of my past. I get it, Mike said, clapping Manny on the shoulder. With his current time constraints, he didn't have time to counsel the former Marine on the finer points of dealing with the stress of returning to a wartime environment. Sometimes going back was more difficult than the first deployment. A warrior's maiden voyage was just that, but the second time, the man knew what he was getting into, and not all men transitioned smoothly. Mike led the other 5 men into the water, silently pushing off the bottom of the muddy canal. The depth was only about 5 or 6 feet, enabling the men to sort of bound off the bottom as they made their way toward their unsuspecting target. 200 yards from the boats, Mike guided the crew to the left side of the shore and slid across the muddy bank, up and onto the grassy flat area above the canal. Behind him, 5 filthy, mud-covered men did the same, moving like giant salamanders through the grass-covered fields that ran along the murky slough. Mike and Tim exchanged glances, each knowing what the other was thinking. The terrain they were on was far too flat to provide any level of tactical advantage. They were well aware they'd be required to strike hard and fast in order to offset their topographical disadvantage. The 6 men moved to within 50 yards of the 2 KPA men standing guard over the KPA boats before stopping to prepare for their assault. The Green Berets didn't like the situation one bit. It felt far too close for an effective ambush. On the other hand, the Bayet brothers were viewing it as one of the most enjoyable things they'd done to date. Scary as hell, but fun. From their position, all 6 men caught glimpses of the 2 KPA men lounging in the rear of each boat next to the motor, ready and waiting for a call from their leader. Every now and again, one of them would stand and raise a set of binoculars to his eyes, staring up the slough towards Petaluma. Not once did either look in the direction of their 6 opponents, 50 yards to their left, lying in the grass like 6 deadly serpents ready to deal death to them. Mike raised his suppressed rifle toward the KPA men and shot a sidelong glance at his team to ensure they were doing the same. They held their rifles up and aimed at the two unsuspecting invaders as he pressed his trigger. Even suppressed, a 5.56 millimeter round leaving the barrel of a rifle at over 3,000 feet per second made a nifty snap that could be heard from quite a distance. The cacophony of unsuppressed rifle fire that followed was cringeworthy. Green Berets had wanted to at least try to lure the remaining KPA men back to the boats. After Mike's first shot, he slid to his right, dropping back down the canal embankment. Reaching the bottom, he forged ahead under the cover of the embankment until he managed an angle on the single remaining KPA man who was clambering over the side of his boat, seeking cover against the inlet's bank. Reaching the bank unharmed, the man scrambled up the embankment and shouldered his weapon, sweeping it across the field to his front, raking the grasses with the weapon's fire, where Mike's team lay. The man was scared, there was no doubt about that, but he wasn't an amateur, as evidenced by his handling of the rifle under duress. Mike had seen men hold their rifles up over their heads and spray rounds indiscriminately over the top of a berm, but this man hadn't done that. He shouldered the rifle and sought to lock on targets before he fired, then moved a short distance in Mike's direction as he prepared for another volley, rose, fired, and sank back behind his cover. As the KPA man dropped back down behind the cover of the embankment, his eyes darted to his right and locked on Mike's figure. The man froze, his hands tightening on his rifle that lay, unluckily for him, across his lap, pointing away from the man who'd appeared out of nowhere. Conversely, Mike's weapon was up and directed at the KPA man's body. Neither man had ever laid eyes on their enemy before that single, frozen-in-time instant. Mike had never seen a real-life North Korean combatant, and the doomed man almost certainly never rested eyes on a real American freedom fighter before now. Firing from above dropped off and then ceased altogether in the absence of viable targets. In the moment of silence that preceded the flurry of battle, both Mike and the KPA soldier gazed at one another, not as enemies, but more with the kind of wonderment as though they'd been viewing an animal thought to have been extinct. No doubt, each man marveled at the other's weapons, equipment, and strange features. Mike was white and burly, while the Korean was dark-skinned and rangy. As with most gunfights, the man with the disadvantage made the first move. KPA soldier rolled towards Mike with surprising speed and efficiency of movement. He drew the rifle across his body as he rolled into a prone position while bringing the weapon out to his front. The KPA man's uniform, his rifle, the patches he wore on his shoulders, and even the camouflage pattern of his utilities were as vivid in Mike's eye as crimson on white, the entire sequence of events seeming to unfold in slow motion. Mike's finger pressed the trigger 3, 5, 8 times, sending the KPA soldier face down in the brackish mud, his rifle pinned under him, unfired. For the briefest second, Mike regretted having killed the man, wishing they could have spoken together, exchanging information about each other's country. But then the slow motion turned to real time, and Mike was up and running, gun up and out, sloshing his way through the muddy water toward the boats as the rawness of what he'd just experienced caught up to him. "Move to the target," he yelled to the men still lying in the grass to his left. "2 down! I repeat, 2 down! Clearing the boats!" Still rushing forward, he slipped, nearly lost his footing in the slick mud, and then moved toward the embankment as 4 heads peered over the top, rifles leveled at the boats from the high ground. Tim rounded the far corner, his face flushed with excitement as he noted the downed Korean next to his partner's feet. The second man lay in the boat, where Mike's first shot caught him through the rib cage at the start of the ambush. He'd killed both men, which wasn't going to sit well with Tim, and he knew it. "Boats are clear," Mike yelled. "Now get the hell off that bank before the whole world sees you 4 standing up there." Sheepishly, the 4 civilians slid down the steep embankment and gaped at Mike's handiwork. When the men stood along the inlet, Mike waved a hand to encompass the area. "Set up security while I grab what we can here." He turned back to his fellow Green Beret. "Get the camera and take pictures." The cops and 2 brothers set up a hasty perimeter around the grisly scene in and around the 2 boats. The first KPA man had been struck 1 time in the side and fell into the boat's bottom, bleeding horribly, laying in a grotesque, contorted position that sickened even the battle-hardened Green Berets. Death was never beautiful, no matter how it was presented. It always carried with it an ominous reminder that mankind only held a short lease on life. Even the most beautiful were ghastly in death, which was probably the reason jobs such as desriology or funeral cosmetology artists were such a huge racket. These people made millions every year. Loved ones and people in general were fearful of death, not wanting to face it even when that exposure came in the form of looking at a friend or loved one lying face up in a casket. Mike flattened the dead Korean in the boat out and then grabbed a boot, dragging the man from the boat to lay the corpse next to his pulverized comrade in the mud. He straightened both Koreans out in the mud and began the familiar but dreadful job of going through each bloodied KPA soldier's pockets. During this grisly process, he collected whatever materials he could that held any intelligence value. Neither soldier carried any personal items such as pictures or identification. Tim took several digital photos of the men clothed before he and Mike stripped the men of their uniforms and equipment. Tim continued taking meticulous photos of the men's radio gear, rifles, web gear, and even their boots. As soon as the items were logged electronically, Mike tossed the equipment into the deeper main channel of the slough. Moving from the now naked corpses, they searched the interior of the simple boats. They found the men's helmets, both with attached nods on their fronts. The Green Berets photographed the head protection along with the nods, and then tossed the helmets into the slough, but retained the nods. The Korean nods appeared to be a European knockoff of the Thales Lucy nods, undoubtedly stolen or purchased illegally by North Korea or China, and then reverse-engineered to be mass-produced for their troops. These weren't the best nods on the market, but they were a hell of a lot better than the human eye in darkness. We'll see if the coppers have worked with these before, Mike mused, looking the nods over. Tim took the nods and stuffed them in his pack before turning to Mike. Now what do we do with that mess? He jutted his chin toward the two dead Koreans, their bodies already being accosted by insects. Dark, little flying, biting, and crawling things covered their mouths and eyes, having syncytolysis, the first stage of decomposition. I'd love to stage them just to unnerve these guys, but I think it's better if we hide the bodies. Not knowing is always worse than knowing. Panting, Mike rested his hands on his knees, winded from the work of hauling the dead weight out of the boat. Glancing out at the slough, Tim grunted. Agreed. Mike shook his head. Let's get them in the water and push them back the way we came in. We can move them half a mile from here without carrying them. Then what? The vultures will tip their buddies off when there's like 100 of them circling overhead. Mike thought about that for a moment and realized all he could do was lessen the chances the Koreans' bodies would be discovered by their comrades. He guessed the force in town didn't have the numbers to mount any sort of wide-ranging search and rescue mission. They would figure out what happened to their missing men by the bullet-ridden port sides of the boats lying in the mud, their hulls sagging after most of the air chambers were perforated by the American bullets. We push them up that canal and stuff both in some drainage pipe under the road up there. When Mike laid out their next order of movement to the 4 men on overwatch, the 2 SWAT cops balked visibly. Bro, we can't just go stuffing dead bodies in drainage culverts, Manny protested. Mike's eyes narrowed. He didn't have time for old world thinking in a very quickly evolving new world where that type of mindset was certain to lead to dead Americans. Listen, and listen good, he snapped, training his full attention on the 2 cops. He ignored the 2 Bayet brothers, who appeared shocked by the sight of the dead, but were otherwise unflinching. He wanted to impart on the 2 cops that the days of writing reports and lubricating the bureaucracy within City Hall were gone. Bodies were going to fall on both sides of the fight. Sometimes they'd have the luxury of burying dudes, and sometimes the bodies of the dead would be left to be consumed by the coyotes or burned in big piles. This is the new norm, fellas. We're going to kill guys, and no one is going to write any paper. We took pictures, and we'll uplink them when we get back with a quick sit-rep on what happened. It won't be done to shield us from liability. Our liability out here is our lives, boys. That's a fact. So let's get these bastards into the water and moved off the kill zone before their friends show up. Stepping off his soapbox, Mike shot a quick look at the Bayet brothers, who were already moving toward the least shot-to-hell Korean soldier. In the water, Mike took point, rifle up, scanning ahead as the two cops pushed the second man he'd killed through the water. The Bayet brothers followed with the other body, and Tim brought up the rear, like some twisted, ritualistic death parade. Manny tried not to look down at the torn body he coaxed through the brackish waters of the little canal, all the while thinking that hardly a week ago he'd been driving around town on patrol answering barking dog calls. He'd sat at a coffee shop and met a girl he'd kind of been seeing as people waved and thanked him for his service. Now he was chest deep in a canal he would never have gone in, dragging a dead man from North Korea towards a drainage culvert where he and his partner Alex would stuff the man inside, hoping the coyotes and other scavengers made short work of the man's body. He wasn't kidding himself. It wasn't anything close to normal, as that army guy had so elegantly put it. New or old, it was complete savagery. He was scared, his internal wiring telling him everything he was involved in out here was wrong. Contradicting his impulse to remove himself from the Green Berets, a small voice somewhere in the distant recesses of his mind nudged him in the direction Mike and Tim headed. That nearly imperceptible force kept Manny moving forward through the distasteful water, ferrying the macabre of torn, mangled flesh toward the dreaded duty of packing it into a drainage pipe. He could only imagine the drainage pipe would be a size too small and require far too much hands-on for his liking. Yet, he found himself pushing forward with his gruesome task, his mind as numb as if it had been spritzed with a light shower of Novocaine.